Hello, and welcome everybody to another episode of Strickland. I'm your host, Shwin and Prez. In this episode 492, I'm joined, as always, by my co-host, Prez, that is at _Presidente on Twitter and at Presidente on Blue Sky. Prez, what's going on?
Not much. I'm back. Me, thee of little faith, who hath been shown to be a fool with my predictions. Here enjoying our few days off with no game 7.
Yes, we are fortunately able to not have to play Game 7 today, or probably at all this season. But so I want to thank Jalen Brunson and the Knicks for at least doing that, providing us with a weekend where we get to watch other teams play Game 7s and shit their pants while they do that. But we're not here to talk about that. We're going to talk about the Knicks. We're going to talk about their series clinching victory over the Pistons, and we will talk about what awaits them in the next round as they face the Boston Celtics in Game 1 on Monday. But before we do that, I do have to make a few announcements. First, that Strickland has a YouTube channel where you may be watching this podcast. If you are, and you have not done so already, please hit like, subscribe to the channel, leave us a comment. That'd be a huge help to us. The Strickland also has merchandise, which you can find on our website at www.thestrick.land. There's a link that'll take you to the merchandise store. There's all kinds of cool stuff that you can find on there, like t-shirts, sweatshirts, hats, coffee mugs, water bottles, you name it, we've got it. Strickland also has a Patreon which you can subscribe to. There are a number of different tiers. There's a $6 tier that gets you access to Strickland's podcast that I host over at Prez. You also get access to Takes My Movies Bozos, podcast hosted by Andrew Seal, aka Doug, along with Zach Blatter, and you get access to the Strickland Discord. The conversation never stops. So the further tiers, they're saying $9 tier that gets you access to Strickland Roll, my solo powder, rant with Nick Steven Moore. You also got access to wonderful premium articles by Matthew Marino, one of the best in the business, and you get access to Strickland NFL, which you guessed it is podcast about the NFL that is hosted by Konstantin Metrikos and Desmond Novak. There are further tiers. It's $15 tier, $30 tier, $50 tier, $100 tier. Let's go with a variety of additional benefits, like listening on our pod recordings, merchandise discounts, and even potentially hosting a podcast alongside yours truly one day, whether you choose to subscribe or not. This would be possible without you. So without further ado, let's get started. I think there's a lot to take away from this Pistons series. A lot of it is stuff that we knew. I don't find this series interesting to discuss in the way that I'm like, oh, how did the Knicks win? What didn't go well for them? What went well for them? Because I think it's pretty much all straightforward stuff. I think it's stuff that we were keenly aware of coming into the series, and stuff that isn't really, I don't think we learned too much that we didn't already know. But what I do think is interesting, and I've kind of been marinating on this for a couple of days, been thinking about it. Actually, it kind of struck me while I was watching Game 6. And I didn't want to bring it up in the post-game pod because I just, look, you win the series, I think it's a time to be happy. And you can worry about all the fucking shit that we've been worrying about all season. We'll worry about, what can the Knicks, make adjustments fast enough in game? Will things change offensively for them that make things easier? Will they get more from the bench? How can they get more from the bench? All these things that we've kind of already talked about ad nauseum this season. But what I was thinking about when I was watching the game, and honestly, while I was watching a lot of this series and all these conversations we've had about what do the Knicks need to do this offseason to improve their depth? Should they keep Tom Thibodeau? Why would they keep Tom Thibodeau? And to be quite honest, in terms of the way we've been talking about it, and I think it boils down to one very basic thing, or a couple of basic things. The Knicks in 2021-22, that summer in 2021, after they had made the first round of the playoffs and got dismissed by the Hawks, they knew, okay, we need to get more firepower. We need to get more offense on this team. We need more talent. And they took some risks, right? They took a shot on Kemba Walker, and then they rolled the dice on Evan Fournier, hoping that these guys' ability to shoot the three ball would give them enough offensive punch, next to RJ Barrett and Julius Randle, that they could at least maintain their position in the East, if not improve. And that season, as we all know, was not a very fun one for Knicks fans. And it was a season where it felt like they had kind of lost some of what made the previous year's team thoroughly enjoyable, yes, for fans, but also a team that had a clear identity and played how they played and stuck to the script. And, did they need more talent? Of course. But the talent that they went out and got did not seem to blend well with how Tom Thibodeau wants to play basketball, how he wants to coach the team, what he's looking to do, how he wants to play on either end of the floor. It just didn't work. It was not a good mix. And the Knicks pretty abruptly moved on from many of the players, not just those two that I mentioned, Kemba Walker and Evan Fournier, but also players that they had re-signed in terms of Alec Burks and Nerlens Noel and Taj Gibson. So they moved on. They turned the page. Many of them in that offseason, and then in Evan Fournier's case, they basically nailed him to the bench 20 games into the next season, and we did not see much of Evan Fournier ever again in the Knicks jersey, thankfully. Now, I bring that up because I think last offseason, look, the Knicks go to the playoffs, they go to the second round, they lose in 7 games to the Pacers. Everybody kind of loves that team. That team knew what it was, played to their strengths, knew what their strengths were, maxed out, I think, in a lot of ways, what they were capable of given the general state of things with injuries. And we could all feel good about that offseason while still understanding, or that season, sorry. But, you could go into that offseason happy, but understanding, the Knicks still need to get another piece or two to truly compete at the highest levels. Now, what those pieces are, we could all have conversations about. But I do think there was a general understanding of the Knicks could probably use another wing. And as we had talked about for years by that point, an option to play 5 out would be really nice, right? It'd be really nice to have a 5 out option. So what did the Knicks do? They went out and traded for Mikal Bridges, and they went out and traded for Karl-Anthony Towns. And we have this year's roster. And they went 51-31, and now they've won a first-round series. But there seems to be a lot of angst among fans, myself included, to be fair, about what is this team's ceiling? Have they maxed it out? Et cetera, all these concerns. But I think at the core of it is the idea of what is this team? What is their strength? What is their identity? And I think their identity and what their strength should be fairly straightforward. They should be a dominant offensive team that more or less hangs their hat on outscoring opponents and keeping the scoreboard ticking over. Now, the issue is, I don't know that Tom Thibodeau is comfortable fully leaning into the identity that they should have. And I think that's been on display with a lot of the choices this season that we've been critical of that he has made. And, it's, there's it all kind of ties into it, right? Where it's why aren't they running more pick and pops for Cat? Why are they not shooting more threes? Why is it that it took until the playoffs to do anything but play deep drop? Blah, blah, blah. And I'm kind of trying to bring all this up to provide the context of if you're the front office now at this point, we'll see how this series plays out against Boston. But even, regardless of how this plays out, I think they have to make a pretty clear decision here. And if they want to keep Tom Thibodeau, if that is the decision they make, I would disagree with that decision. But if they do choose to retain Tom Thibodeau, and to be clear, I'm not ever going to be dead set on removing him until I finish. We'll see how this series plays out. Right now, strong lean is I think they should move on from him. But assuming, regardless of how this series plays out, they decide, okay, we're going to keep him. I think they need to then be realistic about the coach that he is, what he wants from his teams, and realign the roster accordingly. And their moves this offseason to improve the depth should be
real quick. What is that? What is that? What are some examples of some things?
Okay. I'll get to that. So they need to make that if they choose to keep him, they need to reorient this roster to suit him. Now, what does that mean? As you so eagerly asked me, interrupted me, what does that mean? Well, for one, I think it's very apparent he is not comfortable with Cat at the 5. Now, I know Cat has played a bajillion minutes at the 5. I think that's more because of the roster. I don't think he trusts Cat at the 5. I think if Mitchell Robinson was healthy to start the year, or healthy earlier in the year and was at full strength, I fully believe that Mitchell Robinson would be in the starting lineup, and Karl-Anthony Towns would be playing the 4 next to Mitchell Robinson. If you're going to keep Tom Thibodeau, I think it's very important that you don't just stop at, let's say they're like, oh, you know what, we've seen enough from Mitch, we want to keep him. Okay, fine, you want to keep Mitch, and yeah, you can love Ariel Hukporti all you want. I think it's very important though that you bolster that front court and really make sure that the strength of your team, and not just the strength, but kind of like the identity of your team
And
is
we've seen
centered
this,
around him.
right? There's a lot more teams leaning into this where their center depth. How many we're seeing Steven Adams play a big role in addition, and they already despite having Şengün, like good teams, bad teams, like this.
Look at
This is
Minnesota,
not.
right?
Yeah,
Yeah,
there's lots of blueprints out here, and it's
right,
just how much of the season did we spend with Precious and Jericho? Like if this
right.
is to your point, like if this is the identity that if Thibs wants this identity and
And you
you
choose to
see the
keep him.
success and you choose to keep him and you want to lean into that, like don't equip him with the pea shooter, which is Precious Achua. Equip him
Right.
with a
And I
stable of big
right.
dudes for real.
Yeah, and I think it's fair. Like, I do understand they were limited, right? I understand they had
Sure,
very
sure.
limited options. So it is what it is. Maybe this was always going to be
This
the way.
when you revamp the roster like this, you're not gonna perfectly optimize it regardless whether
Yeah,
you want to like fully embrace 5-out spacing or if you want to do cat at the 4. Like you just need another offseason to do that.
right. And so maybe this is just how it was always going to work out because of the moves they made, and it's always going to take a year, which is why I did not think they were a true contender coming into the season, regardless. But I think it's imperative that I feel this way honestly, regardless of the coach, mostly because I think like I I like Cat playing the 5. I also would like Cat to play some 4, and we haven't seen much of that this year because we haven't had the horses to do it. I think they need to go like, so again. If you keep Tom Thibodeau, understand what your team is and what does he want to do, right? We know some very very basic things that Tom Thibodeau, broadly speaking, wants his teams to be able to do, right? So low turnovers, very very important. He wants to be a great rebounding team. And that doesn't just mean controlling the defensive glass, but also being a dominant offensive rebounding team, which is something they have lost this year because of the reason, because you're playing Cat at the 5 and your 4 has been OG Anunoby for most of that time. You're just not going to be a great rebounding. I mean, Mikal Bridges is not a great rebounder, obviously, right? At the 3. So we know that they have sacrificed some of that rebounding. But we know that is a fundamental belief for Tom Thibodeau. He wants to do that. And I do think this is one thing I think is very true. If you're going to play this conservative, deep drop that the Knicks had played for the majority of the season, defensive rebounding is so, so important because when you don't control the defensive glass, playing that conservative of a scheme, that's why it felt so often this year. Man, this team can't get stops. Is it that they couldn't get stops, or is it that they were not particularly strong at clearing the defensive glass, especially against teams that had great size, right? We saw multiple times this season where they played teams that had size that really struggled to control the glass. I think it's very important that if you keep Tom Thibodeau, you reorient the roster so that he can play and utilize the pieces to his strengths. Now, if you do that and Tom Thibodeau completely eschews ever using Cat at the 5 or ever playing small or 5-out or whatever, that's a separate issue. That's a separate problem. But the way I am feeling right now after watching that first round series and seeing how poor the depth was is I can see the front office looking at everything in totality. I think that there's a pretty decent chance there are many people in that front office who aren't particularly thrilled with what Tom Thibodeau has done this year. I also think they might look at it and be like, the depth simply was not good enough. We did not have all of the pieces that you would ideally want to play different styles, right? Because I'm not sure. I don't want to put words in your mouth. For me personally, I don't want to only play 5-out. I don't want to only use Cat at the 5. I want to be able to play big. I want to be able to use Cat at the 4. I want to be able to have, I would
We
love.
don't, regardless of whether it's completely lean into one style, 5-out, completely lean into one style, big boy rebounding, or the hybrid that you just proposed. Either way, like either of those three, or any of those three circumstances, we didn't have the appropriate depth for.
Right.
Like, so
So
it remains true no matter what.
So that's kind of what I've been wrestling with throughout the course of the series, but especially as I was watching Game 6, because that felt like fucking 5 games in one. Is I think that they need to, look, we again after I brought up the 2021-22 season because we talked about that at that time, where it felt like that was a really big learning lesson for the organization in terms of, okay, look, we tried a thing, that thing is just not, it doesn't work for us. We need to get the pieces. We need to get guys who will buy in to the way Thibs wants to play, his messaging, all that shit. And they did a great job of that for a couple of years. And I understand why they made the moves they made this offseason. I still think that the Cat trade was a good trade. I think the Bridges trade was an overpay, but I understood why they overpaid to get him. But I don't think, not forget what I fucking think. I know that they have not gotten the most out of these pieces. And I understand why that's the case, but they need to kind of have a real moment here in this offseason, whenever that offseason comes, where they decide, like, what do we want to be, right? Because it has felt this year, again, we just talked about it, like the roster has felt and this team has felt incomplete for obvious reasons, right? The depth hasn't been there because you did all these moves. Your rookies that you drafted, maybe they aren't ready to kind of play. And even if they were, we're not going to know because we know what Thibs is, right? We know Thibs he was never just going to throw those rookies into the rotation this year. It's never going to happen. And that's all fine, right? I can understand why this season has kind of been the way it is. But they obviously didn't make these moves to just be like a second round team that maybe can be plucky against a team like Boston or now Cleveland, who has elevated, I think, to that contender level. That's not why they assembled this roster. And to get to that level, how do you do that? And if you're going to keep the coach, and honestly, regardless of if they keep the coach or move on from the coach, I think they need to really think about, like, what do we want this team to be? Because if you want this team to be some awesome 5-out, like super efficient, just fucking dynamic cutthroat offense, then you need to go get more players capable of playing that way. Now, you don't need to you can decide to look at this roster. I truly believe this. I think you can look at this roster and be like, we would be better served going back to bludgeoning teams to death ball, which was an extremely efficient offense too, right? We saw the Knicks the last couple of years be a very efficient offense in a different way, in a less sexy way, right? Like a less kind of like, when you think about great offenses, I don't think anybody's like, oh yeah, that 2022-23 Knicks team, what an offense. But they were third in offensive rating, right?
I mean,
And
you look at the teams that use that strategy this year, right? Because there's a couple that are actually hitting the glass even more insanely than we did. Houston, right? The Grizzlies. And none of them have anyone close to Jalen Brunson. And anytime you watch Houston and Memphis, you're like, man, if they had somebody who could really just get a bucket, like this would probably work, right? At least on some level. So like it's not an unreasonable thing to consider at all.
Right. And so like that's kind of,
especially if
I
it
was
comes
trying
with
to
enhanced defense. But yeah,
right. So that's where I was trying to like go with all this. Where like one, I think it's very imperative if you keep Thibs that you kind of lean into that. But I think regardless of, and if you want to go the other way, right? If you're like, you know what, we want to
maybe he does
embrace,
want to go the other
yeah,
way. Who knows?
And if you want to embrace the 5-out and fully unlock that, then one, I think you can't bring Thibs back. And two, you need to, like, I think getting the kind of, or filling out the roster so that you can play 5 out kind of like the vast majority of the time. I think getting those type of pieces is a little bit more difficult. And I don't know that the Knicks have the avenues and the flexibility to get those type of depth pieces. But that, if they make that choice, that's what they have to figure out. How do we do that? And who is the coach that we believe to do this? But if you keep Thibs, and honestly, again, separate from even keeping Thibs, I think your best path forward really is to go back to bludgeon ball, find yourself a starting center that you trust. Maybe that's Mitch. Maybe they've seen enough this year where they're like, you know what? Mitch is back. His health is going to be great moving forward. Ariel Hukporti, we drafted this kid for a reason. We believe in him. We have enough in that front court right now. Whatever it is, they have to commit to it. And also, like, if that means that Josh Hart moves back to the bench, that's fine. Like, Josh Hart he probably helps you. He probably helps that identity more coming off the bench than he ever will as a starter. So like, that is what I have been thinking and marinating on for the last few days, where I'm like, what is this? Because I don't think either of us, we'll talk about the Celtics series. I'm not expecting that to be a highly competitive series. I've been of that belief for a while now. And I'm not going to lose that much sleep over it. Like, it is what it is. We know what this team is at this point. I'm happy they won an exciting first round series. I don't think that portends that they're going to all of a sudden hit another gear here and be able to, throw punches with Boston. Hopefully I'm wrong. But you win the series and it's cool. But like, I think we kind of, there's almost a resignation, right? Of like, all right, well, that was fun, but like, the season's basically over here, and we can start looking ahead. So that's what I've been thinking about looking ahead, and that's also why, like, for a while now, and I thought about this too, where I was like, why have I been like talking about Kessler so much? And I'm like, I think it's because I want the Knicks to just play big again. Like, I think that's what I want them to do, and yeah, like, that's just what I think.
You do love some good rebounding squads.
Yes, I do, and. But like, but is it, they, again, like, they have, this is on them now at this point. The front office has to make, we can sit here and bitch about Thibs and what he doesn't do and what he did do and all this fucking shit all we want. That's the coach that they have stuck with so far for 5 years. If they stick with him beyond the season, then what he is. You know what he is as the coach. It is on you then to get him the pieces that basically give him no excuses, right? Hey, you know what? If we're going to keep this guy, we're going to get you a fucking center that can play next to Karl-Anthony Towns and help you be a dominant rebounding team on both ends, right? Defensive rebounding, offensive rebounding. We're going to get you another guy off the bench that can consistently run a pick and roll and allow you to play and be able to play with Jalen Brunson, right? Like, that's the key. Those are the two key things to me. If you're gonna keep Thibs, and just for what I think they should do is get a center worth a fucking damn, and then get another guy who can reliably run pick and roll, run offense, and who, in an ideal world, would also be able to play alongside Jalen Brunson at times. Beggars can't be choosers here. I would love another wing. Maybe that wing is Pacome Dadier. Maybe you can get somebody for cheap in the free agent market. I don't know. I think the other two issues are a lot easier to address. But looking at this team, and to your point, the way I think the league is getting back to, I don't want to say getting back to like valuing big guys. I think big guys have now kind of adjusted to the modern NBA, and there's more quality bigs who can kind of hang in space defensively and play, a more skilled game offensively and all those type of things. So I think that's why you're seeing more teams lean into like playing big. And I think, look, I think the Knicks have the roster, the makings of a roster that is close, but it's not well-rounded, and it's up to the front office to decide, how do you want to fully round out this roster? What's your vision? How do you want to play? And yeah, that's it. I wanted to start with that because that's what I've been thinking about watching these playoffs.